Hey guys, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Today we're going to be doing a review and 3 looks with the new Anastasia Beverly Hills Fall Romance Eyeshadow Palette. So before we get into it, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel before you leave. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy, and let's get into it. Alright, so I am really excited for this one. This is the new Fall Romance Eyeshadow Palette. This is what the packaging looks like. It's just a really beautiful kind of deep purple that I think is gorgeous. It's very textured on the outside with the gold lettering. This palette does have a 12-month shelf life and is made in the USA. This retails for $55 US, or I believe around 70 Canadian. So opening the inner packaging, this is what the palette itself looks like. So it is also quite textured. This inner packaging, it has more of that felt material, which I think is really pretty. I know this kind of packaging was big on like their soft glam, maybe modern renaissance. Those types of palettes all have this fuzzy packaging and they haven't done it in a long time, and I definitely missed it. So I do love this. I also just love the packaging in general. It's very sleek, but definitely says fall. And then the border is just this sort of metallic-y purple. Opening up the palette, you get 12 beautiful eyeshadows. You do get their standard mirror, and then the palette is just their standard format they've been doing for the last couple of years. So initially looking at this color story, I'll be honest with you, I'm very intimidated. I obviously have very fair skin, so I am afraid this is going to be too deep for me. We are going to do 3 different looks today. I'll do one on each eye, and then I'm going to create a more wearable look that I will wear for the rest of the day. Alright, so let's look at some swatches really quickly. So I've just done them down my arm right here, and this palette is beautiful, quite honestly, and I think it's going to be a lot more wearable than I first suspected. So let's look at these shades. The very first one right here is the shade Smoke, and this is actually beautiful. It's kind of got like a duochrome shift to it. It's kind of gold, but it's got these silvers in there that I think is absolutely stunning. And this was also the creamiest shade. It reminded me somewhat of the new Natasha Denona Sparkling Wet formula she's got going on. It was just very creamy. A little bit went so far, and it really does just give that wet effect. Then we have Moonlight, which kind of surprised me in that it was very kind of lackluster in swatching it out. Then we have Fireside, which is a gorgeous metallic. Then we have Divine, which is actually more of a satiny kind of shade as opposed to a shimmer like I originally thought in the photos. Then there is Crown, which is beautiful. This reminds me of Quasar from the Cosmos palette. Then there is Ember, which is like a greeny brown, but it's kind of that sequin formula. Then there is Leather, which I think is probably going to be my transition shade for most of the looks in this palette. When it's swatched out, it's a lot less intimidating than it actually looks in the pan. Then we have Thorns, which is a matte forest green. Then we have Crimson, which is another matte. Then we have Midnight, which is a very deep purple metallic. Then we have Mulberry and Twilight. So typically I like to look at comparisons toward the end, but I don't have any other palettes that I want to compare this to, but I did want to make a couple of notes. So one shade in the new palette is Mulberry. And I remember there is also a Mulberry shade in the Soft Glam palette. So I compared the two for similarities, and they're not the same. So you can see they are similar, but the one in Soft Glam is just a matte, deep Mulberry shade, whereas the newer one leans a little bit more brown and has a shimmer to it. It's really more of a satiny type shade, so they're not identical. They're similar enough, but I would definitely say the newer Mulberry is a lot more brown and has some shimmer. Also, what got my attention was the shade Crown, which is this one right here, because it made me think of Quasar in the Cosmos palette that came out back in the early summer. So these are not identical either. I definitely thought they were initially. So we have the new Crown shade, which is kind of like a greeny gold. It's really very pretty. And then Quasar is much more of a duochrome. It's like a greeny gold, but it's got a peach shift. I feel like there's even a little bit of a blue shift when the light hits it the right way. So they're not identical, very similar in some ways, but not identical either. And the only other palette I wanted to look at was last year's holiday palette, and that is the Rose Metals. And Rose Metals is one that I also said was just a little bit more grungy than I would like. And you can definitely see certain similarities between the color stories, but they're not identical. I do, however, think they would be great companion palettes if you do have both. All right, so for look number one, I think we're gonna play with the purples because of course that's one of the things I'm most interested in. I'm sure I'm not the only one. And because Divine ended up being much more of a satin, I'm going to try to use this one in the crease. So I'm just picking up the tiniest bit because it's definitely deeper than I would typically use for a crease shade. And I can always add more, but taking away is a lot harder. So I'm packing this one on the outer corner. I'm gonna grab a little bit more and start blending that up into the crease. Actually, I just had a bit of an idea on what I want to do with this shade actually. So this look might be super simple, but I'm okay with that because we are going to do 3 different looks. So I will definitely be able to test the palette. I'm going to grab a smaller detail brush, going back into Divine. I'm going to do a halo eye. I know I've already closed it at the top, but that's fine. Just packing this one on that inner corner. I have a really bad habit because I have semi-hooded eyes. I have a bad habit of raising my brows when I do my eyeshadow so I can see everything. You really shouldn't do that because when your eye is directly open, you're not exactly going to be doing this. I have a bad habit of doing that, so I do that, but then I will just kind of look straight on and make sure that I can still see everything when my eye is open. So that's just kind of my way of counterbalancing that bad habit because I can't seem to curb the habit. And so far I'm really liking Divine because you can build it, but you can also blend it out really easily. Like we got a pretty good diffused crease kind of out of that one. And I'm just building the outer corner a little bit more. I'm bringing this corner in. This shade is incredibly pigmented though, so I definitely do recommend going in with a really light hand and building. Just going in with my crease brush that I cleaned up, and I'm going to just blend those edges a little bit better. Now I'm going into Moonlight, which is a typical shimmer, so I'm going to pick that up with a finger. I will say Moonlight feels dry in comparison to, say, Smoke and Fireside, and also Crown. These all feel incredibly creamy, whereas Moonlight feels a little bit more on the dry side. Just placing this one right in the very middle. That's really pretty. It ended up being a little bit foiled on some of those spots. That's pretty. In order to blend this better, I'm going to take more of a flat shader brush into Divine, and I'm just going to pick that up kind of on the very tip of the brush, and I'm going to use that to mesh Moonlight in. Okay, I think I'm going to take a really tiny brush, this is the BK Beauty 207, into Moonlight. And I just want to use the tiniest bit on the inner corner just to brighten that area. And I think that's it. Just a really simple halo eye using 2 shades. So let me pop on some mascara and I'll show you the completed look, and then we'll move on to look number 2. All right, so here is the final look with mascara. I like it a lot better now that we have mascara on. I don't think it's my favorite look. I don't even think it's my best work, but I love the reflect out of the shade Moonlight. I think that's so pretty. And I really love that with Divine, I was able to blend it into the crease, pack it onto the outer corner, and then also use it over top of that shimmer to mesh it into the outer corner shade. I think it was just a very versatile shade. So I'm really impressed with the shade Divine. Moving on to the other eye, I think I'm going to try to play with the greens. And then for the final look of the day, I know I want to go into Smoke. Okay, so on this side, I'm going to start with Leather. Again, I'm just going to tap in pretty lightly. These shades are incredibly pigmented. I noticed when I dipped into that matte shade, I feel like there was less kick up than there typically is from the ABH mattes. Typically, these have a ton of kick up, and that seemed like less. That was only one shade though, so this is a really nice crease shade. It's still a little deeper than I would typically use, but it's still really, really nice for this. Okay, from there, I think I'm going to take Thorns. Again, just doing one little dip. The shades in this palette are definitely very, very rich, and I love that this is going to be gorgeous, gorgeous on deeper skin tones. But I do think it can be workable for fair skin as well. I think if you like barely there eyeshadows, then I would definitely pass on this one. Of course, it's definitely a very deep palette, but I still think it's very workable. Now I'm going to dip into Twilight. And again, these are the dips I'm doing, just, and I'm getting so much pigment. I'm using a very light touch. This one I think would be a really great liner shade as well if you're looking for that. Okay, so now I am pretty knee deep in those grungy tones. I'm going to take the shade Crown on a finger, and this one is going to go all over the lid. This shade did feel really, really creamy as well. Now I'm just going to dip into Ember very lightly as well. Again, very, very pigmented, and I'm going to put this one just between that shimmer and our outer crease shade just to mesh them together. I'm just lightly tapping and grabbing a crease brush. I'm just going to blend around those edges. Okay, let me pop off camera, add some mascara, and I'll be right back. Alright, so here is the finished look number 2 with mascara. I liked it a lot more with mascara. It's actually reminding me a lot of a look I did with the new Too Faced palette, but I do like it. It's definitely something I would create. Look number 1, it's not my favorite. I think it's nice. It's not my favorite. I just feel like there's something missing, and I can't figure out exactly what it is. And then I also wanted to mention I'm getting very, very minimal fallout with these shades, which is really impressive, and I'm not even getting a ton of kick up in the pan. In fairness, I am going in very lightly, but I'm not getting a ton of kick up, so I'm impressed with that. Let me take off these looks. I'm going to see if I can preserve the mascara, and then we will create look number 3. All right, let's get into the third and final look. I'm once again going to start with Leather, and this is going to be my crease shade for both sides. I was thankfully able to preserve the mascara, so I just have to work around that a little bit. Sometimes it's nice though to do your eyeshadow around mascara because it does kind of help the fallout situation if you get any. And this shade is blending really, really nice throughout the crease. I absolutely admit I was completely intimidated by this palette when I first ordered it because I think this is a color story that is definitely a lot more rich, and I typically don't go for a lot of richer, deep tones. But I really wanted to review this one because, one, I really don't have a color story like this in my collection. So it's definitely a bit more unique to my collection than some of the other palettes that I have. I'm sure I could pull something together, but I do feel like this color story is a bit more unique. And in this day and age, it's really hard to come up with something different and unique, I think. So I'm really happy about that. And then I also wanted to test out to see how wearable I could make it for my fair skin tones. Next, I'm going to grab Mulberry, and again, just tapping in really lightly. I feel like I have a lot of subscribers that are a little bit more on the fair side too. And obviously I am very fair, so when I saw this, I thought there's no way this is gonna work for my skin tone, but then I think the reviewer in me, who just needs to know everything about all the makeup, had to try it out. So I think if I wasn't on YouTube, I probably wouldn't have picked this up, but so far I'm not upset that I did. I feel like we're really making things work over here, so I'm pretty happy about that. And this is probably one of the most fall color stories I've ever seen, to be honest with you, so that's nice to see as well. Is this probably going to be one of the most used palettes in my collection? Probably not. But it's definitely something I will reach for, especially this time of year. I can see myself grabbing for this one for Thanksgiving, and just for a lot of those deeper fall looks. Now I'm going to add the littlest bit of Crimson, which is an interesting name for this shade. Because when I think crimson, I think deep blood red kind of thing. That sounds gross, but that's what I think of, whereas this seems a little bit more like a chocolatey brown, and literally just being so delicate with adding this in. And I definitely could have stopped after mulberry, but again, I'm just trying to test multiple shades. So I did decide I'm gonna go in with Fireside for all over the lid. I can't help myself. It's just so pretty. Same thing on this side. This shade is beautiful. This is kind of like, I want to say kind of like a rose gold, but it's not an offensive loud gold by any means. I think it's definitely more of a rose gold. It's just really, really pretty. There's something about this shade that's beautiful. I'm getting a little bit more fallout with this one, but it is still pretty minimal. All right, so here is the final look. I'm really loving the shade Fireside. I just feel like it's a beautiful gold, but it's got like a peachiness to it, which is really flattering and beautiful. So I'm happy with how this look turned out. Definitely my favorite of the three that I created, followed by the green one, and the purpley one would be last. Let's talk about my final thoughts. So like I mentioned, I don't have any palettes I want to compare this to, simply because this is a more unique color story to my collection. I typically don't reach for these rich, deep tones. I typically don't order these types of palettes, but I wanted to review this one for one, and two, this is pretty unique to my collection. Like I mentioned, if I wasn't on YouTube, if I didn't want to create content, I may not have ordered this, simply because it is definitely a little bit rich, and I am obviously a very fair skin tone. EBH is also known for having very pigmented shadows, so I probably would have skipped this. However, this is probably one of the most fall color stories I've ever seen. I think it's absolutely stunning. I like that they added a mixture of different mattes, because I think a lot of us on the Cosmos palette had the criticism that although Cosmos is really, really nice, the mattes were the same mattes that they put in every single palette, whereas these I actually feel like give a little something extra. So I think that's really nice. I would prefer maybe one lighter matte in here, but leather actually does work pretty well. I really wanted to use the shade Smoke today, but I got distracted and used Fireside instead, so I will definitely probably use this in a look, maybe over on shorts or something like that. I stand by what I said, that I think this palette would be a good companion with the Rose Metals from last year. They are both these deeper, richer, grungier color stories. I will say I found Fall Romance to be a little bit more intuitive when figuring out the looks I wanted to create. I struggled a bit, I'm not going to lie, but I felt like it was more intuitive than Rose Metals. But I do think they would be great used together. I love the packaging of this. I think it's beautiful. I think the quality is phenomenal. Some of the shades did feel a little bit more dry to the touch. Moonlight is one of them, and this is a shade that I feel like I really need to keep playing with on swatch. It's incredibly sheer. I'm not sure if it's going to do anything. Put it on the eyes and it looked really, really beautiful, but I don't know. I feel like I need to see a little bit more from that shade to determine whether I really like it. The rest of these are quite gorgeous. I didn't play with Midnight or Smoke, and those are the only two shades that I did not play with today. Otherwise, all of these got some use, and I am pretty proud of that. I think they all performed really well. They look beautiful on the eyes. I'm excited about Smoke again because it just feels very, very creamy, and it reminds me of the more wet formula in the new Natasha Denona palette. I love that, and Fireside is just a gorgeous, gorgeous metallic. Crown, also very, very beautiful. I thought that was pretty. The mattes are wonderful. This sequin shade over here, I don't know that it was necessary. I would maybe have swapped this one out for that lighter matte that I was mentioning, but it ended up working into my look, so I'm happy with that. I think this palette is beautiful. I think the quality is excellent. I think this is gorgeous for the fall. I think this is definitely going to appeal to those with deeper skin tones. I do think you can absolutely work with this palette if you have fair to light skin. I think you just have to be a little bit more careful, like I was. They were easy to work with. I had so much fun creating with them, and I just had to go in with a very light hand. One dip into the shadow was enough for one eye. So if anything, your shadows are going to last longer. But if you're fair to light, I think that's the trick. That's all you need to do, and you can definitely work with this palette also If you just don't like richer tones, then skip this. I don't know that I would recommend this for beginners that are on the more fair side because, again, these are super pigmented. But I think if you're wanting this palette, I don't think you would be at all disappointed. I will say some of the photos make this look super, super deep. Some photos made it look super wearable. In all honesty, I think it sort of falls in the middle. Overall, I think it's absolutely beautiful. I will definitely enjoy this a lot more over the fall months. Maybe not so much throughout the rest of the year, but through the fall, I can definitely see myself reaching for this. And I do also want to create some looks with the rose metals because I think they'll be really nice working together. So overall, I had a lot of fun playing with this. I will definitely continue to do so. I'll give you my final thoughts at the end of the month, but I think if you're wanting this palette, I don't think you'd be disappointed. I'm really liking this and I actually am glad I picked it up. But that is it for me today. Thank you so very much for watching. Let me know down below if you are planning to pick this one up. Let me know your thoughts. I love hearing from you guys so much. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. I do upload at least 3 new videos every single week. Thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!